bike that's not going to mechanically fail, but is also running as best as it possibly can. So I guess we can start with, you've got your contact points, you've got your shoes, and your seat and your handlebars. I'm not going to talk about position because that's a very, very long, drawn out scenario. The seat that's comfortable for you is the seat that's comfortable for you. Your pedal choice is your pedal choice. Don't use old cleats. If you've been walking around on your old cleats for a long time, you've forgotten how floppy they are. They don't cost a lot. Screwing some new ones will get us to do it. As far as your handlebars go, there's lots of reasons why you can get a lot of shoulder pain, neck pain, and on a ride, as long as what you're going to do, it'll get highlighted basically. A lot of your training rides won't necessarily be as long as the actual ride itself. So you need to make sure that you have a very comfy bar tack. You need to make sure the position's right and you get as comfy as possible. But once you're there, you can have your old bar tack that you've been sweating over that has no padding, and you're sitting on a bar for the entire day. If you sit on anything, and don't even worry about pedaling, and just do this for a long time on a metal bar, it's pretty uncomfortable. And you've got a cycle as well. So if you can make that as comfortable as possible, you're going to be straight ahead. The next issue is your tyres, right? So nobody wants to be getting recurring punches, and nobody wants to be told that we told you to buy new tyres. You don't necessarily need to go out and buy brand new tyres, but make sure your tyres aren't worn for a start. That's pretty obvious. Make sure they're not flat. A lot of the reasons we have to replace tyres these days is because a lot of them actually dry out, and if you didn't put it, it won't be, but if it is, people think my tyres aren't worn, I can still see my tread indicators, which are usually little dots, but the rubber dries. So at this time of the year, it's perfectly fine. You've got dry roads, you're not going to notice. As soon as we come into winter and we start getting slippery roads, you might find that you're chucking into the corner and you keep going. So replacing your tyres regularly, and I don't care if you get them off the net, we're not trying to sell you tyres, but having old tyres that you've had for years should not be something you're really proud of, because it can bring you down in the corner if it's a bit slippery. The next point would be tyre pressure, and that changes for everybody depending on how wide their rims are, how wide their tyres are, and how heavy they are. So if you run too much pressure, you're going to be, again, feeling every bump in the road. It's not a lot of, in the old school, we used to think 18mm tyres, tiny little narrow ones, pump up to 130 psi, go really fast. And it was true on the velodrome, but it's not on the road. So have a talk to somebody, including myself, not now because we don't have time, about the tyres that you're using, the rims you're using, and the right tyre pressure for you. Chances are you can get away with a little bit lower than what you've been using, but if you run it too low, then you've got more chances of picking up punches on the side of the road. You should always run your front tyre about 5 psi lower than your rear tyre. A lot of people just pump both up to the same, and it's really normal. The front tyre is doing a completely different job, and it needs to be a little bit more supple. It takes out that vibration, and you're not going to be losing any traction from it. You'll be gaining traction, but you're not going to feel soft and squishy. The rear tyre has to carry all the weight of the body, so that's why you need that roughly 5 psi. So if you're 70, you should be 65. We'd only say that on 28mm tyres because it is higher than that. Once you have got a comfy seat, one thing you should do. Does anybody use cream, chamois cream? Yep.
What's it called? Cream Unique, that's right.
That's the brand, and that's fantastic. Yep. It's butt cream, and that's Robbie McEwen's. And yeah, honestly, if you haven't used it in the past, it's a whole new level of comfort. It's more hygienic. It's just going to make, especially on a long day like that, especially in the winter when it rains, if it gets wet and you've got a wet chamois, it can be quite uncomfortable the next day. So try a chamois cream. If you haven't before, try one and you'll love it. Now, we actually need to talk about bikes. So, we have, you need to get your bike serviced for a number of reasons, and you don't need to get a full service done regularly. If you're riding a lot, and obviously you guys are training for this ride, so you probably do ride a decent amount, I'd like to think so, otherwise it's going to be a bad day. You need to get your bike serviced thoroughly at least once a year, and the reason that we do that is to remove your fork and inspect your fork for any compression wear in your stem, any bearing split ring contact ring that sits on top of here. We see a lot of forks where the ring has been rotating on the fork when we pull them out. There was no sign to you, there was no reason why you thought you needed to. We drop it out and we go, that's really dangerous. We send you a photo and you go, oh, I'm lucky. So getting your fork removed, re-grease, and obviously checking your headset bearings, putting grease in there is important, but actually just as more of an inspection is probably one of the most important things you can do. Obviously, you put the bottom bracket next. It's a major working part. Depending on what sort of bike you have, it might be problematic, or you may have never had a problem with it. I'm not going to mention brands because you probably know who you are if you've always been having creaking bottom brackets. That is worth checking and greasing. Obviously, you've got your wheel bearings. A lot of people forget about the most important thing that I can waffle on for a long time about. Everybody wants a bike that goes efficiently, wants to be smooth and fast. You achieve that by aerodynamics in your position and your bike. People will spend a lot of money on ceramic bearings for here and here, which I may have done, and it's got dust on it, so don't worry about that. And here, and even in their jockey wheels. These are bearings that are sealed inside a very clean area with seals on them. They've got grease in there. They're going to be fine. You can spend a lot of money and buy high quality bearings, and you might save 0.2 of a watt and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars. This chain is out to the environment. You've got roughly at 90 RPM, you've got about 60,000 metal on metal articulations in a minute, which sounds ridiculous. But you've got 124 links, you've got inner plate, outer plate, roller, pins, and every one of them is moving all of the time. And this is metal on metal. So it doesn't have any seals, it doesn't have a bearing, it's just metal on metal. So understanding how to maintain your drive chain with the right lube, how to apply it correctly, not over applying, you can be 5 to 6 watts ahead of somebody with just normal drip oil or a good quality waxed oil. You can be that much ahead. If you have a really dirty drive chain full of sand and grit, you're grinding away dollars and cents, which you could have spent on some good lube, which would last you for years. So understanding your drive chain is, again, something we can talk about for a long time, but we won't. Wax-based lubricants and applying them correctly is the best way to go over pretty much every drip lube on the planet, and that's not me saying that, that's independent worldwide testing of all of the high quality lubes have come to this conclusion, being tested in lots of different labs. So a lube that you might see at a bike shop and it claims this and that, chances are it doesn't, and if it does, it might do it in a velodrome, but it doesn't do it when you add environmental factors, i.e. we live in Perth, so it's covered with sand. So having a good lubrication is good. One thing that we find 3 times in the weekend when I was looking after people, gear cables break. Gear cables work perfectly fine 99% of the time, but when they break, it's really, really a problem, especially in a hilly course. So getting your gear cables replaced, even though you may not, we're talking $10 or $15 when you get your bike serviced, especially if you've ever had a broken cable in the past, because levers that tend to break cables tend to do it on a regular basis, whether it be every 6 months or a year. It's worth just saying, hey, can you chuck a new cable in? Most of the time it's pretty easy, depending on how integrated your frame is and your bar and stem combination. So that would be the next thing to look at. The other thing is, that's all stuff that we look after. We teach you how to do your drive chain, and we can give you the products or tell you where to get them to make your drive chain optimized, working well and efficient. The rest of it is pretty much something that you don't need to worry about. You need to clean your drive chain, you need to know how to put the lube on and when to do it and when not to do it. Once you've done that, there isn't really much you need to look at other than probably every 6 months, maybe at the start of winter and the end of winter, getting a decent service done. The other thing that you might want to think about is your gear ratios for such a hilly course, and you go, well, I'm fine with these gears, I struggle up those hills on the weekend, but add another 100 Ks on and you're pretty knackered, you might wish you had another gear. So there's a couple of different options on how to achieve getting a lower gear on there, which is obviously what we're talking about, so you can potentially put a bigger cassette on. Is that cassette compatible with your current derailleur? Sometimes it is. We might be able to get you an extra 2 teeth on there on a cassette, which is a consumable, which isn't going to cost you too much money. If you need to put on a longer cage derailleur to account for that bigger cassette, is it cheaper to put on some smaller chain rings at the front? So all of these factors come into play, and we can walk you through that if that's something that you're interested in. I'm sure everybody here has oiled the chain before. I'd like to think so. 5 minutes? Okay. Okay, everybody coming close. So, this is very, very brief because we can talk about this for hours. Where we want to apply lube is down here, not up here. Centrifugal force will push it off the chain. I'll just come around this way. So we basically, what we want to do is put a light amount on the left-hand side of the chain. So down this side, right here, where my fingernail is, down the left-hand side, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then down the right-hand side, 5, 6, 7, 8. Once we've done that, and the reason we've done it on the top of each side is so that it can get in between the outer plate, the inner plate, and the roller. If you just roll it straight down the middle, like most people do, you're going to transfer a lot to the cogs. It's going to get quite messy. You're not really putting it exactly where it needs to be, but you may not get any between the outer plate and the inner plate. Once you put the lube on, the most important thing to do then is spend some time, about 2 minutes. If you're using a wax-based lubricant, whether it be Smooth, Squirt, or Super Secret Lube from Silka, you need to massage it in with your fingers. Sounds crazy, but it's going to dry to a solid, and if you haven't worked it into where it needs to be, it's going to dry and you won't get any down at the pin. You'll probably cause more damage. So you've got to keep doing this for about 3 or 4 minutes. If you've done it properly, you've cleaned your drivetrain, which is another thing you can spend 15 minutes on. You're not going to get any down there. You probably cause more harm than good. So with a wax-based lubricant, you have to massage it in. With any wet lubricant, which is what 90% of you are probably using, wet drip lube, do what we've said, work it in, and just do this for about 3 or 4 minutes. Never fast, because the faster we go, the more it flicks off the lube onto our spokes and our braking circles.
The chain should be doing this.
You're not really trying to get oil on the cogs. If you with a wet drip lubricant, you will transfer some onto there. As you go through the gears, if you want to, and the reason why I would always suggest you do it in the bigger chain ring. Okay, come down to the small. Yep. So once you've worked it through a little bit, and it started to get to where it needs to be, you can go slowly up through the gears without any problem. But as you go up through the gears, your chain will flick. That top one will do this every time you change. It's not too much bad on the way up, but on the way down, it bounces. See that? So you've just flicked oil all over your braking surface, your spokes and everywhere else. So if you are going to do that, it's not a bad thing to do. Change gear, hold your finger on here, and you remove the spring tension which causes the flick. So you just do that, and it will come down without doing. Because if you go up and down through this, you've actually just put oil all over your carbon rims, your braking surface, and you've caused a bigger problem. So always do it slow.
1 minute.
And if you are going to change gears, then you basically need to take the spring tension off there. Once you've done that with any wet drip lube that you're using, the most important part is right now, is grab a rag, make a fist, and take off every single bit of oil you can. Where you need the lube is in between the inner plate, the outer plate, underneath that roller and down to the pin. Those are the places your rag can't touch. So what you're wiping off with your rag is the stuff that's going to make a mess and attract the dirt. And just keep doing it. It's perfectly fine. You're not going to cause any damage. And we'll have to make it 20 minutes next year so I can show you how to change a tyre properly. I know you all know how to change a tube. There are some tips, and if anybody wants to have a chat about that, anybody who's got tight tyres and has struggled to get them on, there are some really simple tips that I can teach you to make it really, really simple. And somebody with really small thumbs, I can show somebody really big who's been doing it for years, who's struggling with tyre levers, can come along and go flip, 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 and then just walk away like a superhero. Yeah, there's a couple of techniques. So if you want to come and speak to me after, and we've got a bit more time, I'll quickly run through
During the
what he wants to
race,
do.
how many stations do you have?
I'll be there at the start line, and I'll be there at the halfway point. It's impossible to be everywhere all at once. If you're roaming and you've got roaming vehicles, then there's no stationary point where everybody knows that they can get help. If somebody needs to be, they can be picked up for one of the sport vehicles, taken to the halfway point where their bike can be, and we're going to work it out that way. It's a very difficult scenario to try to have 20 mechanics, and you can have 20 mechanics all over the course. It still doesn't mean that there's going to be one in the 200k course that's going to help you at that point.
Time's up. Sorry.
So that's
Thank
pretty
you
much
very much.
what you do.
Thank you.
No worries.